It's thinking about whether it wants to do it. There we go. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started. We're going to be about 45 minutes here today, so we'll throw a lot of information at you and then send you on your way. But we've got Margaret Shakti with us again from the library. We so appreciate her taking time out of her day to do this for us. And she's going to talk with us a little bit about APA style and format. This is one of those things that, like, everybody needs a refresher every now and then, even me. And it's okay to look things up. So she's going to really help us understand kind of the whys of how we do some things and where we can go to find the information that we need. So if you have any questions during the course of this, just drop it in the chat, raise your hand, unmute yourself and go ahead and ask. And we can always sort of tailor things to the questions you have and what your needs are. So with that, I will turn it over to Margaret, and I will keep an eye on the chat for us.
Wonderful, thank you. It's great to be with everybody again. I'm going to start by sharing my screen. I will jump into the little PowerPoint I have here. All right, so tonight we're talking about APA citation style, and specifically how you go about creating those citations, putting them in your paper, putting together your reference list for your project. When we talk about APA, we're actually including 3 separate things that are covered by that term. We're talking about the style guide for your paper's formatting. So that's things like the size of the margins, the type and size of the font, where the page numbers go, things like that. We're also talking about the rules for the references list and the in-text citations. That's probably what comes to most people's minds when you say APA. You probably think automatically about the references and the in-text citations. And that's how we organize and tag where each piece of information comes from as we're doing our research. And then the third thing that APA covers are guidelines for word choice and writing style. When we're thinking about citations, you can get a little nervous. Sometimes I find it helps to understand where this idea of citations comes from, and it can kind of inform how we think about them. For the case of APA, it was developed by the American Psychological Association. They were looking and investigating what was then the new science of psychology. And, by 1929 or thereabouts, they were noticing that they were having issues standardizing the way that they were publishing, the way that they were citing things in their papers. And so their association got together, came up with a style guide, said, we're going to cite everything this way for consistency so we can understand each other's research. And that's how APA style was formed. It's frequently updated whenever there's a new change in how information is presented. They make updates to the manual. So, for example, with the addition of the internet, now with the addition of AI, they update the manual. We're currently on the 7th edition, which was released in 2019. And the APA citation style changes as its users change. And it's really a utilitarian kind of thing. And I think it helps to remember when you're working with this that it's not this almost magical, strange, hard to understand citation format. It's literally a way that a professional association decided to communicate amongst themselves, to standardize so that they could talk to each other effectively. And once you understand that, you can kind of see how it fits in with your own writing and how you might incorporate it as you go into the workplace. So what is a citation? First of all, it's a way of organizing. It shows you where each piece of your information came from as you put things together. It helps other researchers navigate your work so they can kind of recreate your intellectual journey. They can see what you read, whose arguments you pieced together to form this like whole thesis in your paper. It allows you to give credit for other people's work. It allows for intellectual honesty, which is obviously like a big ethical consideration. You want want someone to take one of your ideas without giving credit, so you don't take someone else's idea. And also, importantly for US students, allows you to identify authoritative voices in your work so that you can show that it's not just you who is saying this, it's not just your idea, but there are other people, authoritative people in the world who are already publishing, who agree with you and who support your ideas. And it can lead like credence and strength to your argument when you can identify those voices that are supporting what you say. So thinking about our in-text citations, I have some examples here on the screen. It's pretty basic. The in-text citation goes in the text right next to wherever the fact that you're using is from. So maybe it's a quote, maybe you're paraphrasing something that you read in an article, maybe you're borrowing a graph, or you're talking about someone else's research. Right in the paper where you enter that information, you are going to put an in-text citation which says where it came from. It's going to be parentheses, and inside of the parentheses will be the author's last name and a comma and the year that the article or documentary or what have you was published. And you kind of think about this if you think about a Wikipedia page, right? When you're reading Wikipedia, there are those little blue numbers next to each of the facts. And if you want to know where they got their information from, you can click on the number, jump down to the bottom, and see the list of their sources where they can back up what they're saying. The same concept applies with the in-text citations. They're there so the reader, if they want to know more, they want to know where that quote came from, they want to know who developed an argument that you're evoking, they can look at that citation, jump down to the references list, and find the complete information on the source. So it really is like a finding aid for your users. So that's the in-text citation, which is in the body of your paper. Then at the very end of your paper, you're going to have what is called the references list. It's on its own page. So it's separate from your paper. It has its own page at the bottom. You're going to write the word references and put that in the center of the page. And then underneath that, you'll list all of your sources alphabetically by the author's last name. You can see that they the way they're formatted on the page with a hanging indent. So it's kind of the opposite of what you usually use when you're writing. Usually when you're writing paragraphs, you indent the first line. So the first line is in a little bit. With your references list, it goes the other way around, where the first line is what's out far. And I'll show you how to do that in your Word document as we get further along into tonight. But you would just list all of your sources in this reference list, and it would be at the bottom of your paper. There are different rules for different materials. That's something you need to be conscious of when you are creating the citations. If you're pulling the citation from the database, so for example, you look at an article and then in the database where you're reading the article, there's a cite button and you use that, that's usually fine. But if you're using a citation generator or a citation website, you really need to double check that you are citing the correct type of resource, because the reference for an article is going to look a little bit different than one for a book versus a website versus a YouTube documentary. And the reasons for that is that each of these types of media have different identifying components that are important when you are trying to find them. So for example, if it's a YouTube documentary, you will need to know the creator, but you'll also want to have a link to the video. But you might not need a link to a book. If you're reading a physical book, there might not be a link. And so different things are important when we're talking about different kinds of media. And that's why the citations for each of these kinds of sources look a little bit different. So it's something you need to pay attention to when you're creating your references list is, are you citing the article as an article? Are you citing the book as a book? Because they are going to have slight differences, and those differences can be important. If this seems a little bit overwhelming, don't worry. The library has attempted to make your life a little bit easier. You'll remember I mentioned that the APA puts out a style guide. We're on the 7th edition right now, but it is a thick manual. It has, oh goodness, I want to say about 200 pages or more, going into detail of how exactly you're supposed to cite things. The library went and made more of a cheat sheet guide that you can look at that should answer all of your questions. That is pretty user friendly, unless you're citing something that maybe it's an outlier and it's not covered in our guide, and then you just have to reach out to the library and we can look in the actual manual to find an answer for you. But for right now, I am going to switch over to the library's guide. See here. So I'm going to the LibGuide, which you should all be familiar with from the last time we had one of these live sessions. And today I'm going to be clicking where it says APA 7th edition guide. And here it opened up. You can see at the top of this page, it has the actual publication manual. If you click this link, it takes you to the library catalog and shows you where you can find it on the shelf if you wanted to borrow the actual book, which you can. We have multiple copies. So if you would like to look at the actual manual, you are more than welcome to. Don't be overwhelmed by the amount of tabs that you see along the side. You do not need to read this whole thing. It's designed to be user-friendly, where you jump into the section that you need, find the information that's relevant for your particular kind of source, and then jump back out again. So for example, let's say that you are citing a YouTube documentary in your work. You would go to where it says media includes videos. And in each of these sections, it will give you kind of advice at the top. So questions that people tend to have are covered in the bullet points at the beginning. Then in the purple, you'll see the information you need for the citation and what order it needs to go in, where the punctuation goes, what needs to be in italics. So these are the pieces that you need to find and put in that order. And then below that, you'll have several different examples. So since this is the media tab, it has a bunch of different kinds of media. We show you how to create a reference for a photograph, for a video, for a drawing. Here is one for a YouTube video from Harvard University. So there's a bunch of different kinds of examples, and you can make yours and then visually check it against the examples to make sure that yours lines up. One thing you want to pay attention to is those details. So are you using a period or did you stick in a comma, right? Do you have spaces in the correct places? It's the small things that will trip you up. And so some advice that I have just from seeing students work on these myself is even if you're feeling a little nervous, don't rush through it with a ton of energy. You want to take it a little bit slow, go step by step methodically. And even though that feels like it's taking more time, it actually saves you time in the long run because you don't have to like double and triple check if you just do it right the first time. Now let's imagine maybe you're also citing a website. You would just click where it says websites. Again, at the top, you just have some advice on common questions people tend to have. Under that in the purple, what information you need, in what order, where's the punctuation, what's in italics, and then below that, you have 2 examples. And you could do that for books, you could do that for articles, PDFs. There's a tab for other types of sources. So for example, class material, government reports, personal communications, this one that comes up a lot when students are doing like original research. And so all that advice is in there. And like I said, if you have a particular resource and you don't think it lines up with one of these categories, that's a great time to reach out to the library because I can look at that full manual that we have a copy of and see if we can find some extra clarification for you. Another thing that can be really useful in this guide, if we go under where it says Citation Basics, we're going to click that. It answers those kinds of questions that students sometimes have as to what should I cite? Because when you're just starting out, it can be confusing, and sometimes it might feel like you need to cite literally everything on the page. And like, how do you approach that? What do you do? So maybe in that case, you might want to come to this section of the LibGuide and see how it lists out, like, what do you cite? It's when you quote a source, it's when you summarize a source, when you paraphrase a source, when you borrow an image, a graph, statistics. And what do you not cite? You can see down here, it says it's okay to skip the citation if you're stating your own opinion, because you don't have to cite like your own thoughts. It's okay to skip when the information is considered common knowledge. You might have come across this in some of your previous classes when the instructor told you that you did not need to cite the textbook. That's because for the purposes of your class, the textbook was considered common knowledge because everyone was supposed to have read it. So everybody would know what's in it. So it's common knowledge and you don't need to cite it. Understanding what is common knowledge can feel a little bit tricky, especially if you're a little bit new to the field of study that you're working in. And in those cases, you might want to talk it over with your instructor. You could call the library, talk it over with me. But like the example that's listed here is, it means it's a non-controversial fact that you could find in multiple sources that most people would know, like the sky is blue, or George Washington was the first president of the United States. Things that, again, are common knowledge. Those you don't have to cite. And another instance is when you're using your own original work, such as a study you conducted for your assignment. This can honestly depend, actually. I've seen researchers definitely do cite themselves in their own papers. Like when they cite previous studies that they've done, they will cite their own name oftentimes. But generally, if you're talking about something that you already did, especially if it's involved in this capstone project, you do not need to cite that because you are the authority there and you're the one narrating the paper. So you don't need to cite that. But again, if you have questions, please do reach out to the library. And there are also some additional sources, just in case maybe this LibGuide isn't detailed enough for you, or you just want to see another way of talking about APA. APA does have a website. There's a link at the top of the additional resources page. They update it, so maybe you want additional guidance on a particular subject. I know some students have questions about AI. They go into that a lot in the APA website. The Purdue OWL is a helpful resource for your APA. And then there's a couple others here. One's how to use the Microsoft Word citation tool. So, if you're writing in Word, which I hope you are because it's available through the college, that will show you how to kind of set up the citation manager within Word, which could be helpful. All right, that is everything that I had on my list of things to share with you tonight. Do we have any questions, or does your professor have anything to add?
I always like to add here that when it comes to like the formatting of your paper, the title page, that sort of stuff, I do provide you guys with a like pre-formatted template for you to use. So that'll be in sort of later weeks of the course when you get into that. So you don't have to worry about sort of setting up the nuts and bolts of the paper. It will have, everything you need and all of the like headings and categories that you should have for your paper. So I just try to kind of make that a little bit easier for you all.
I would also say a pro tip that I do have for you, if you're finding it difficult to incorporate the in-text citations into your writing, because sometimes it can feel a little bit clunky. Actively pay attention to how the authors are doing it in the articles that you're reading. So as you're doing your research, just pay attention, like how are they referencing these citations? How are they, mixing it in with their writing so that it flows nice and it looks nice and it's clear? the more you actively imitate the way the other professionals are doing it, the easier it's going to be when you write your own. So just let that be something that you consciously are paying attention to as you go into the research phase, because it'll make it easier when you get to the writing phase.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that's a good tip. It is kind of an art to figure out where and when to put your citations. One of the ways that I like to tell students how to incorporate citations into their paper is to think of it as a process of like turning the citation on and then turning it off. So you need to introduce your citation with something like an introductory clause. Research indicates according to so and so. And that clues your reader into like, hey, this is where I'm using research, and what comes after will be some data or some information that came from a source. And then when you get to the end of the material from your source, that's where you put, your citation. Uh, and then that signals to the reader, okay, that's over. What comes next is going to be your analysis as a writer. So I think it helps me to think of it like, okay, I've got to clue the reader in, I've got to turn on the citation and let them know that it's happening. And then the actual in-text citation, the author, comma, year, in parentheses, comes at the end to signal this is the end of that information. I've always found that kind of a helpful way to think about that. Are there any questions?
One thing I always get wrong, because I'll have one professor, it's like, oh, you have to capitalize all the things like in an article. And then I saw a lot of the thing like I never know when to capitalize the top of the article. Like are you supposed to capitalize? I know you're not supposed to capitalize like the with, but then some say no, don't capitalize anything, only capitalize the first word and like a noun. And I'm like, I don't know what you want me to capitalize. So I'm never sure. And like the italics, because I know usually you put the actual naming of the article or paper in italics, but then if you go into other things, you actually put the last part in italics. So I guess I get confused with all those parts. That's usually what gets me, because I know if I do like a publication, you do the italics with the name of the article, but if you do something, I forget, there was one that like if you do, I want to say the one Central Penn one is, I think this is a book, or it's a version, like they have 40 like it's now I can't talk, but that one you put in italics the journal part, not the actual name.
So I can give you a little bit of information on the italics. So it depends on the type of source that you are citing. And that kind of ties into what I was talking about with, you need to pay attention to the type of media that you're working with, because the rules are a little bit different. So for example, if you are referencing an article, you're going to have the title of the journal, the volume number, and the issue number in italics. But if you are citing a book, then the title of the book is going to be in italics. And so that's something you can notice if you're looking at the examples that we have for you in the guide. You'll be able to see, like, for a specific type of media, what goes in italics, what doesn't. And so that's a way, like, I also have to check, because I always want to make sure, like, oh no, where did the italics go in this? And that's when I go to our LibGuide and I'm like, okay, I have a book, what part here needs to be in italics? And then I double check, because it's not something that lives in my brain all the time. And even if I did have it right, I will second guess myself. So I double check anyway. So what I would recommend is that when you're making the reference list, when you're putting in those italics, like, visually check the LibGuide and say, okay, I have a book. What does my book need to do? Well, I have an article. What does my article need to do? Same thing for your websites, for your YouTube videos. You just want to visually confirm, because again, it will make you feel better to double check anyway, just to tick the box and say that, like, you visually confirmed it. And we don't expect that kind of information to live in your brain permanently anyway. In regards to the capitalization, it's going to be the first word in the title, and then any proper noun, so like a person's name, a product name that's like branded would be in like capitalized. And then after the is it a colon or a semicolon? The two dots. It's a colon?
It's a colon, yeah.
Okay. After the I always forget. After the colon, the first word after it will also be capitalized. The first letter in the first word will be capitalized. Does that help?
Oh gosh, because the other time you tell me I didn't capitalize enough of it. So even if it's capitalized in the name on the article, I still don't capitalize it because it's
Right.
not an actual name.
So you
Yep.
don't want to just copy verbatim how the title looks in the article because they make stylistic choices and they might not be using APA, right? Because there's a bunch of different citation styles out there. And that's one of the reasons why you need to double check your citations, even if you pull them from a database using the cite button, because sometimes the computer, if, for example, the journal article title as printed in the journal, if it's in all caps, the computer will put it in all caps, which is wrong. So that's why you always have to visually confirm that they're formatted correctly.
Okay. Yeah, because they're all over the place when it comes to the capitalized. Some put some in some places, some don't. Even when I grab them from Central Penn. And my one professor, and I forget, he's like, no, you just capitalize everything, but and if with, he said, just do all those and you'll be good. Because he kept giving me mark-offs for the way. And I'm like, I don't know anymore. Because you guys got now, like, it's been a while since I've been in like grade school. So like a proper, I'm like, okay.
Yeah. Joni, I'm going to make you feel a lot better right now because I'm going to tell you that I don't have that kind of time to check citations like that.
Okay.
Like,
What was it? Paul? His name's Paul. But yeah, he was like telling me, he's like, no, you have to, everything has to be capitalized except for like,
Oh, was this perhaps with Paul Miller?
yeah.
Okay, so it could have been a different citation style because in a lot of his classes, he teaches journalism and they use AP, which is Associated
That-
Press style, which is
yeah.
different than APA. So that could also have been part of it if it was in like a media class. That AP style is different from APA style. They work differently. One's for the press and one's from the Psychological Association. So that could be the difference that you were finding there.
Okay. So
That being
even
said,
if it
Go-
copies out of the like Central Penn thing where it says cite APA 7 and it has capital letters, I shouldn't leave them capitalized if they're not either the first letter after a semicolon or if they're not a noun.
A proper noun, so like a name.
Proper noun. Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly. You want to double check it because computers make mistakes.
Yeah. And sort of here's my general philosophy on citation. Like the goal of citation is to let your readers know where your information is coming from. If your citation does that, you have like won 95% of the battle. And the rest is commas and periods and capitalizations. And I care far less about that than whether the citation has the information in it to get people where they need to go. I am far more interested in the big picture things like your ideas and your argument in the paper than I am in whether the correct title is italicized, etc. I don't think I have ever looked at the references list in a capstone project at that level of detail. Like if you just go completely rogue and don't do any kind of citation style, I'm going to notice. But if what you've got there takes the, approximate shape of an APA citation, I'm going to look at that and be like, we got the job done. So like rest assured, I am not going to hammer you with 10-point deductions for not having a capitalized letter in the right spot. That's just not who I am as a person. So if that helps you breathe a little easier, I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, like I said, I just get like always confused on them. Usually I have it right. It's always something small. And I'm like, oh, well, I didn't see that.
Well, and
And
don't
I'll be
forget
looking
that. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Rachel.
No, fine. I'll be looking at your drafts. So like you're never submitting something like, in its final version without me having given you feedback on it. So if you submit drafts and I notice something about the references list that isn't, exactly the way that it needs to be, I'm going to give you feedback on that so that you can fix it for the next sort of round of revisions. So like my goal is not to ever surprise you at the end of the course with like, haha, wham, boom, roasted. So yeah, my goal is to sort of help you guys get along this process. But I'm much more concerned with the argument of your papers than I am about where the, commas and semicolons go.
And I would add to that, don't forget that besides your instructor, if you're ever feeling nervous and uncomfortable about the citation process, or you need some help as you're getting started, or you want a second set of eyes looking at it, we do have the tutor system available that you can always request a writing tutor and ask them to double check your citations for you, or you can reach out to me here at the library. I have no problem reading through a draft of your paper and letting you know if you are in the right line of proceeding, or if maybe you don't quite understand it yet. I can help with that too. So you never have to go and submit something when you're confused. You can get the answers first, that you are on the right track before you go and submit an assignment. There are people here to help with all of that, so don't stress out about it.
Yep, I agree. Any other questions? Allison, you got anything?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, great. Well, then I will wrap up our recording here. Sorry, I got dumped off the call there for a minute. But I have noted your attendance, so I will go ahead and put that in the gradebook for you all. And then I'll get this posted later tonight for the rest of the class to view.
Wonderful. Have a good night, everybody.
Hey, you
All right,
too. Thank